I live in Millfield, a tiny, ordinary small town in Ohio where nothing is supposed to ever happen, where the most exciting weekly event is the grocery store's Saturday morning pastry sale and the local library's monthly book club that only 3 retired teachers regularly attend, where everyone knows everyone's business, where the speed limit never goes above 35 miles per hour, and where residents pride themselves on living quiet, predictable, uneventful lives. I'm just a regular 28-year-old ordinary guy, working a boring part-time administrative job at the town's small community center, renting a modest 1-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on Main Street, drinking too much iced coffee every morning, forgetting to water my houseplants, scrolling through my phone for hours after work, and living the kind of monotonous, routine-driven existence that most people would describe as perfectly normal, unremarkable, and utterly devoid of chaos or absurdity. Before last month, I would have sworn that my life was so standard, so textbook ordinary, that nothing weird, bizarre, or inexplicably ridiculous could ever happen to me, let alone an entire week of back-to-back surreal, absurd, borderline insane incidents all unfolding within the borders of this sleepy, unassuming small town. But that week changed everything. That 7-day stretch of pure, unfiltered, small-town American chaos didn't just happen to me. It happened through me, a relentless chain of bizarre coincidences, absurd human behavior, misguided good intentions, animal encounters straight out of a comedy movie, bureaucratic nonsense that defies all logic, and tiny, spiraling disasters that start from the most harmless, ordinary moments and balloon into full-blown, laugh-out-loud, head-scratching chaos. This is not a story of big city drama, dramatic accidents, or manufactured Hollywood chaos. This is the weird, unpolished, utterly authentic bizarre magic of everyday American small-town life, the kind of absurdity that only happens to regular, ordinary people just trying to get through their mundane daily routines, pay their bills, run simple errands, and mind their own business, only to have the universe and their equally weird neighbors throw every possible ridiculous curveball imaginable at them, one after another, without a single pause or reprieve. It all started on a mundane, rainy Monday morning, the kind of gray, drizzly Ohio morning that makes everyone want to stay in bed, skip work, and ignore all adult responsibilities, a morning so ordinary it could have been any other Monday of the year. I woke up at exactly 7 a.m. Just like I do every single weekday, to the blaring sound of my phone alarm, my apartment still dim with gray pre-dawn light filtering through the fogged windows, the faint hum of the laundromat's dryers already buzzing downstairs through the floorboards, a sound I've grown so accustomed to over 2 years of living here that I barely notice it anymore. I dragged myself out of bed, stumbled to the tiny bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, brushed my teeth, threw on my standard work uniform, a plain navy blue polo shirt, khaki trousers, and scuffed white sneakers, and headed to the kitchen to make my usual morning iced coffee, the one small ritual that makes my boring workdays feel slightly bearable. My plan for the day was incredibly simple, entirely normal, and completely uneventful. Grab my coffee, drive the 2-minute drive to the Millfield Community Center, clock in at 8 a.m. Spend the morning filing paperwork, answering phone calls from town residents asking trivial questions about park permits and community classes, restock the office supply closet, eat a pre-made turkey sandwich for lunch at my desk, clock out at 4 p.m. Stop by the grocery store to pick up milk and frozen pizza for dinner, go home, watch a couple episodes of a mindless reality show, and go to bed at 11 p.m., repeating the exact same routine I follow 5 days a week, every week. There was absolutely no reason to suspect that this perfectly ordinary Monday would spiral into the start of the most bizarre, chaotic, unbelievable week of my entire life, a week filled with so many weird, funny, inexplicable events that I still struggle to believe it all actually happened to a regular nobody like me, living in a boring little town where nothing ever happens. The first crack in my perfectly normal routine showed up at the local gas station, the only gas station in town, a run-down, decades-old speedway on the corner of Main and Oak Street that every single town resident uses daily, the kind of gas station where the cashier knows your usual drink order, the soda machines always leak a little sticky syrup on the floor, and the hot dog roller has been spinning the same batch of questionable hot dogs for as long as anyone can remember. I stopped there like I always do every Monday morning to grab a 20-ounce iced vanilla latte from the gas station coffee machine and a pack of gum, a tiny, mindless pit stop I've made hundreds of times without a single issue. I pulled up to the pump, parked my beat-up 2012 Honda Civic, turned off the engine, and walked inside the warm, slightly stale-smelling gas station convenience store, ready for my usual 30-second transaction. The store was empty except for the usual morning cashier, a quiet high school kid named Jax who always wears a faded skateboarding hoodie and never says more than 2 words to anyone, and an older woman standing by the snack aisle who I recognized as Mrs. Henderson, a retired elementary school teacher who lives 3 blocks down from my apartment, the kind of sweet, mild-mannered elderly lady who waves at everyone on the street, bakes chocolate chip cookies for the neighborhood kids every holiday, and volunteers at the community center's after-school reading program every week. I'd known Mrs. Henderson since I moved to town, and she was always the definition of gentle, polite, unassuming normalcy, so you can imagine my utter shock when I walked in to find her standing in front of the entire chip display, arms crossed firmly over her chest, staring down a confused Jax with the most intense, determined, dead serious expression I have ever seen on a human face, refusing to move an inch from the snack aisle. I froze mid-step by the door, coffee cup already in my hand, utterly confused. I'd never seen Mrs. Henderson even raise her voice at anyone, let alone stand her ground in a gas station snack aisle like she was negotiating a high-stakes legal dispute. Before I could quietly grab my drink and slip back outside to avoid whatever weirdness was unfolding, Mrs. Henderson turned her head, spotted me, and immediately waved me over like I was her legal witness and the only person in town capable of understanding her very serious grievance. Reluctantly, I walked over, completely clueless what was happening, and she launched into a passionate, urgent explanation, her voice firm and unwavering, like she was reporting a major federal crime rather than a trivial gas station issue. "Young man, you need to hear this," she said, leaning in slightly, her eyes sharp with righteous indignation. "This young man working here has committed a grave injustice against the entire town of Millfield, and I will not leave this store until he corrects it." Jax, looking utterly defeated and confused behind the counter, just sighed and shook his head, muttering under his breath that he didn't sign up for community drama before 9 a.m. I blinked hard, trying to process what was happening, and asked Mrs. Henderson what on earth was wrong, what terrible injustice had occurred to make the sweet retired teacher stage a one-woman protest in the gas station snack aisle at 8 o'clock on a rainy Monday morning. Her answer was so absurd, so utterly ridiculous, so perfectly small-town bizarre that I almost laughed out loud on the spot, but I held it back out of pure respect for how seriously she was taking the situation. "They rearranged the potato chip shelves," she stated flatly, with the gravity of someone announcing a natural disaster. "For 27 years, the sour cream and onion chips have been on the top left shelf, right next to the barbecue chips. Every single resident of this town knows that. We've built our snack routines around that shelf layout for nearly 3 decades. Last night, someone came in here and moved them. Now the sour cream and onion chips are on the bottom right shelf, underneath the pretzels, and the barbecue chips are alone on the top left. It's disruptive, it's confusing, it's unfair to every loyal customer who shops here every day, and it's wrong." I stood there completely stunned, processing the fact that this sweet, kind elderly woman was staging a full-on protest over rearranged gas station chip shelves, refusing to leave the store until the shelves were put back exactly the way they had been for 27 years. Jax explained helplessly that the regional gas station manager had come through the night before to do a mandatory shelf reset for corporate policy compliance, that he had no choice in the matter, that he couldn't move the shelves back without corporate approval, and that he'd already had 3 separate town residents come in that morning to complain about the new chip layout, each one as upset as Mrs. Henderson. Apparently, in tiny small-town America, where daily routine is sacred and change is terrifying, rearranged snack shelves constitute an unforgivable community offense. Mrs. Henderson refused to accept this explanation, pulled out a crumpled notebook from her purse, flipped to a page covered in neat handwriting, and revealed she had already written down the names and phone numbers of 14 local residents who supported her protest, demanding a formal petition to force the gas station to revert the shelf layout immediately. She even asked me to sign it, informing me that chip shelf consistency is a foundational part of small-town quality of life. I politely declined, grabbed my coffee, and fled the gas station in a state of pure disbelief, my ordinary Monday morning already completely derailed by the most absurd neighborhood protest I had ever witnessed in my life. I thought that was the peak of weirdness for the day, the one tiny bizarre blip in my otherwise normal week, and that the rest of my day would go back to its usual boring routine, but I was dead wrong. The chaos was only just beginning, and every single hour of that week would bring a new, more ridiculous, more unforgettable bizarre incident, each one more uniquely American small-town chaos than the last. I arrived at the community center a few minutes late, still shaking my head over the chip shelf protest, ready to dive into my mundane paperwork to reset my normal day, but the second I walked through the front doors, I was greeted by my boss, Linda, a sharp-tongued, no-nonsense 50-year-old woman who runs the community center with military-level precision, who never tolerates tardiness, slacking, or any form of workplace chaos. Normally, Linda is all business, strict about schedules, obsessed with keeping the center running smoothly, and completely unflappable in every situation, but today, she was standing in the middle of the lobby, staring up at the ceiling with a look of pure, horrified confusion, her hands on her hips, completely frozen in place. I walked over and asked her what was wrong, assuming a light fixture had broken or a pipe was leaking, a standard minor building issue we deal with occasionally. Instead, Linda pointed wordlessly up at the ceiling tiles above the front desk, and I looked up to see the most random, inexplicable sight imaginable: a single, full-sized, perfectly intact plastic flamingo, the bright pink lawn ornament staple of every American suburban backyard, wedged firmly between two ceiling tiles, hanging upside down from the lobby ceiling, staring down at us with its goofy plastic beak and molded eye. I stood there speechless, staring at a lawn flamingo hanging from our office ceiling, absolutely baffled. There was no logical explanation for it. The community center closes at 9 p.m. every night, locks up tight, has working security cameras, no overnight staff, and absolutely no reason for a giant pink lawn flamingo to be stuck in the ceiling tiles 20 feet above the front desk. Linda had no idea how it got there, when it got there, or who put it there. She'd opened the building at 7 a.m. Like usual, did her standard walkthrough, and noticed the flamingo immediately, and had been standing there staring at it in stunned confusion for nearly an hour before I arrived. We spent the next 40 minutes investigating every possible angle to solve the mystery of the ceiling flamingo. We checked the security camera footage from overnight, only to find that the cameras facing the lobby had glitched out exactly between midnight and 2 a.m., the only 2-hour window all week where there was no footage recorded. We checked all the doors and windows, every lock was perfectly intact, no signs of break-ins or trespassing. We checked the roof, the attic space above the ceiling tiles, found nothing out of place, no extra flamingos, no tools, no evidence of anyone coming or going. We asked the handful of early morning volunteers who had arrived to set up for the senior yoga class if they knew anything, and none of them had a single clue. The flamingo was just there, appearing out of thin air, wedged securely in the ceiling tiles like it had been installed there on purpose, a permanent bizarre new decoration for our bland community center lobby. Eventually, we had to grab a tall step ladder and a pair of pliers to carefully pry the flamingo loose from the ceiling tiles, a ridiculous task that had both of us struggling not to laugh the entire time. Once we finally got it down, we examined it closely. It was a standard, cheap dollar store lawn flamingo, no markings, no writing, no tracking numbers, no clues whatsoever about who put it there or why. We still have no explanation for the ceiling flamingo to this day. No trespassers, no broken locks, no camera footage, no witnesses, just a random pink lawn flamingo appearing out of nowhere in our office ceiling in the middle of the night for absolutely no discernible reason whatsoever. By 9 a.m. word of the ceiling flamingo had spread through the entire small town, and local residents were stopping by the community center all morning just to ask if the flamingo story was true, taking photos with the mysterious lawn ornament, and creating wild conspiracy theories about who could have pulled off the prank. Some people thought it was a bored teen prankster, others thought it was a retired town resident with a weird sense of humor, a few even joked it was a supernatural sign from the small-town chaos gods. No one has ever solved the mystery, and the ceiling flamingo remains the most famous unsolved weird incident in recent Millfield history. After spending half my morning dealing with a rogue ceiling flamingo and fielding non-stop resident questions about the bizarre incident, I finally got to my paperwork, thinking the worst of the day's chaos was over, but the universe had more absurdity in store for my mundane workday. Around noon, during my lunch break, I decided to walk across the street to the town's tiny public park to eat my sandwich and get some fresh air, escaping the non-stop flamingo questions and office chaos for a few minutes of peace. Millfield Park is a tiny, quiet green space with a few old wooden benches, a small playground for kids, a walking trail around a small pond, and dozens of mature oak trees that provide plenty of shade on rainy, overcast days. It's always quiet, peaceful, and uneventful, the perfect spot for a quick lunch break. I sat down on my usual wooden bench overlooking the pond, pulled out my turkey sandwich, and had just taken my first bite when I noticed a middle-aged man standing at the edge of the pond, dressed head to toe in a full camouflage hunting outfit, complete with camouflage hat, gloves, boots, and a small utility belt, standing perfectly still and staring intently at the pond water like he was about to embark on a high-stakes wilderness hunt. I thought it was a little odd. We're in the middle of a residential town park, not a remote hunting forest, and it's broad daylight on a Monday afternoon. But I mind my own business, assuming he was just an avid outdoorsman checking for ducks or geese. I kept eating my sandwich, glancing over occasionally, and after a few minutes, the man slowly, carefully, and dramatically pulled a tiny plastic net out of his utility belt, leaned down over the pond water, and began performing the most intense, focused, hyper-serious hunting stance I have ever seen, aiming his net at the pond's surface like he was tracking a rare wild predator. My curiosity got the better of me, so I walked over to politely ask what he was doing, assuming he was fishing for minnows or trying to catch frogs for a pet or something harmlessly ordinary. What he told me next was so absurd, so unnecessarily dramatic, so uniquely bizarre that I almost choked on my sandwich mid-bite. The man explained to me, in the dead serious tone of a park ranger delivering critical wildlife safety information, that he was on a squirrel relocation mission. According to him, a small group of particularly bold, aggressive park squirrels had been terrorizing local residents for the past 2 weeks, stealing snacks from picnic tables, darting at small children, and hiding acorns in the park's playground equipment, and he had taken it upon himself to humanely trap and relocate every single problematic squirrel in the park to a safer, more remote wooded area on the edge of town. He went on to explain that he was a self-appointed civilian wildlife relocator, had no official training or permits, had bought his entire camouflage hunting outfit specifically for squirrel relocation missions, and spent every weekday lunch hour patrolling the town park to hunt down rogue squirrels. He told me he'd already relocated 17 squirrels in 2 weeks, each one carefully trapped in his tiny plastic net, placed in a breathable cardboard carrier, and driven 2 miles out of town to the woods, where he released them with a formal wildlife safety blessing. As he spoke, a tiny gray squirrel darted across the pond bank 10 feet in front of us, and the man immediately froze, held up a finger to shush me, whispered, "Target acquired," and slowly crept forward in full camouflage, moving so slowly and deliberately you would have thought he was stalking a 500-pound bear rather than a tiny fluffy park squirrel. The squirrel, completely unbothered by the grown man in full camo creeping toward it, simply grabbed an acorn off the ground, sat up on its hind legs, and stared directly at him like it was mocking his entire dramatic operation. After 3 full minutes of excruciatingly slow stalking, the man lunged forward with his plastic net, missed the squirrel by a full foot, lost his balance on the wet grass, and tumbled backward into the muddy pond bank, landing flat on his back in a pile of wet mud and fallen leaves, his camouflage outfit completely covered in brown muck, his net flying across the grass. The squirrel simply flicked its tail, grabbed another acorn, and scampered up a tree like nothing had happened. I stood there in stunned silence, watching a grown adult man covered in park mud, groaning as he sat up, completely defeated by a tiny park squirrel. Instead of being embarrassed or laughing at himself, he simply brushed mud off his camo hat, sighed deeply, and said, "They're crafty. Highly intelligent urban wildlife. This is why the mission takes patience." He then stood up, retrieved his net, and marched back to the pond edge to resume his squirrel relocation mission, completely unfazed by his dramatic muddy fall. I finished my lunch in quiet disbelief, watching this camouflage-clad squirrel hunter patrol the park like it was his full-time job, and walked back to work wondering how my perfectly normal Monday had turned into a non-stop parade of small-town absurdity. By the time I clocked out of work at 4 p.m., I was already mentally exhausted from the day's bizarre events, a senior citizen chip shelf protest, a mysterious ceiling flamingo prank, and a full-time camouflage-clad civilian squirrel hunter patrolling the town park. I thought for sure the rest of my day would be quiet and normal, that the chaos had finally run its course, but I was wrong yet again. I stopped at the town's only grocery store, Miller's Market, on my way home to pick up milk and frozen pizza for dinner, my standard after-work errand. The grocery store is tiny, family-owned, slow-paced, and always predictable, the kind of store where the cashiers know regular customers by name and the produce section is always fully stocked with basic fruits and vegetables. I grabbed my milk and frozen pizza, headed to the self-checkout line, and was halfway through scanning my items when a store announcement crackled over the loudspeakers, stopping every shopper in their tracks. The store manager's voice came over the speaker, calm and serious, making the most ridiculous public announcement I have ever heard in a grocery store in my entire life. "Attention Miller's Market customers. Please be advised that we have a loose cart corral basket in aisle 3. All customers are asked to proceed with caution, avoid making sudden movements, and do not attempt to approach or corral the loose basket. Staff is en route to contain the situation. Thank you for your cooperation." I froze mid-scan of my pizza, completely confused, and looked around at the other shoppers, all of whom were equally stunned and confused. A loose shopping basket was prompting a formal store-wide emergency announcement, warning customers to avoid sudden movements and not approach it. I peeked around the corner into aisle 3 and saw exactly what the announcement was referring to. A single empty plastic shopping basket had tipped over in the cart corral and rolled 3 feet away from the rest of the baskets, sitting harmlessly in the middle of the cereal aisle, completely stationary, harmless, and non-threatening in every possible way. 2 teenage store employees were standing at the end of the aisle, staring at the lone loose basket like it was a ticking time bomb, too scared to walk forward and simply pick it up and put it back in the corral. Apparently, Earlier that week, a customer had tripped over a loose shopping basket in the parking lot and filed a minor complaint with the store's corporate office, so the store manager had implemented an over-the-top zero-tolerance policy for loose shopping equipment, treating every stray basket like a major safety hazard requiring formal emergency protocol. For the next 5 minutes, all grocery store activity came to a complete halt. Shoppers stood frozen in aisles, no one moved, everyone waited for staff to contain the loose basket situation. Finally, the store manager, a stern middle-aged man in a dress shirt and tie, walked down aisle 3 with slow, deliberate steps, bent down, picked up the completely harmless empty basket, placed it back in the cart corral, and then made a second announcement declaring the situation resolved and the store safe for regular shopping again. I stood at the self-checkout, staring at the entire ridiculous scene, and realized that small-town American normalcy is just regular people living their lives with wildly overblown rules, dramatic reactions to trivial problems, and uniquely weird interpretations of everyday situations. I left the grocery store with my milk and pizza, still laughing to myself about the loose basket emergency lockdown, and headed home to my apartment, ready to finally unwind after the most chaotic, bizarre, absurdly funny Monday I had ever experienced. I thought Monday's chaos was an isolated fluke, a one-day stretch of random weirdness that would fade away and let me return to my normal routine on Tuesday, but that week had other plans. Tuesday started just as weird, with a new layer of small-town bureaucratic absurdity that only gets stranger and more unbelievable as the week unfolds. I woke up Tuesday morning determined to have a completely normal, uneventful day, brushing off Monday's chaos as a series of random coincidences. I made my coffee at home to avoid the gas station drama, drove to work early to avoid being late, and settled into my desk ready for a quiet day of paperwork. 10 minutes after clocking in, I received a formal email from the Millfield Town Administrative Office, an official town government memo addressed to all community center staff, titled Official 2026 Public Lawn Ornament Regulation Update. I opened the email confused, having no idea what lawn ornament regulations had to do with my office job, and quickly realized the entire memo was a direct response to our mysterious ceiling flamingo incident from the day before. The town government, upon hearing about the rogue ceiling flamingo at the community center, had officially voted to implement a new temporary town ordinance banning unauthorized lawn ornament placement on public government property, specifically naming plastic flamingos, garden gnomes, and decorative wind spinners as restricted items. The 4-paragraph official government memo spent multiple paragraphs outlining strict new rules for public building decorations, threatening fines for any future unauthorized lawn ornament placement on town property, and required all community center staff to sign a formal acknowledgement form confirming we understood the new flamingo ban by the end of the workday. I spent my entire Tuesday morning printing government forms, getting signatures from all staff, and filing official paperwork for a town ordinance created exclusively because someone stuck a pink flamingo in our office ceiling. To make the day even more absurd, Mrs. Henderson, our chip shelf protester from Monday, showed up at the community center Tuesday afternoon with her signed petition of 17 local residents, formally submitting a community request to the town council to mandate permanent standardized snack shelf layout at all local gas stations and grocery stores, arguing that consistent snack placement was a vital public quality of life priority that required official town regulation. I found myself sitting at my desk, processing official town government paperwork for both a flamingo ban and a chip shelf standardization petition, realizing that small-town American bureaucracy spends serious time, energy, and taxpayer resources regulating the most trivial, ridiculous, utterly meaningless parts of everyday civilian life. By Tuesday afternoon, the squirrel hunter from the park had also become a local minor celebrity, with multiple town residents stopping by the community center to tell me stories about his dramatic daily squirrel stalking missions, with several residents even starting a small informal fan club for his absurd wildlife relocation efforts. One local dad told me he'd started bringing his young kids to the park every lunch hour just to watch the camouflage squirrel hunter attempt to catch squirrels, calling it the best free entertainment in town. Tuesday's chaos was quieter than Monday's, but it solidified the pattern. Every single day that week would bring a new layer of small-town weirdness, a new bizarre ordinary person drama, a new example of how the most normal American lives are secretly filled with inexplicable, hilarious chaos that no one sees coming. Wednesday ramped the absurdity up even further, introducing animal chaos that spiraled into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. Wednesday morning started normally enough, but halfway through my workday, I received a frantic phone call from my next-door apartment neighbor, an incredibly sweet, quiet college student named Mia who never causes trouble and rarely even knocks on my door. She was panicking so hard I could barely understand her through the phone, begging me to come home immediately because she had a major emergency animal situation in her apartment. I grabbed my keys, told Linda I had a personal emergency, and rushed home, fully expecting to find a stray cat or a lost bird stuck in her apartment, a standard minor pet emergency. When I burst through our apartment building's front door and knocked on Mia's door, she threw it open, looking frazzled and wide-eyed, and gestured frantically toward her living room. I walked in and froze in absolute shock. Sitting calmly in the middle of Mia's small living room couch, completely relaxed and totally unbothered, was a full-grown adult male turkey. A massive, plump wild turkey, standing nearly 3 feet tall, with glossy brown feathers and a bright red wattle, sitting on her fabric couch like it owned the place, pecking gently at a crumb on the cushion. I stood there speechless, staring at a wild turkey occupying my neighbor's apartment couch in the middle of a small Ohio town, completely unable to process what I was seeing. Mia explained the absolutely insane sequence of events that led to a wild turkey invading her apartment. She'd left her apartment window slightly open that morning to let in fresh air while she ran to the mailbox to check her mail, a 30-second errand. In that tiny window of time, this bold, fearless wild turkey had wandered up from the wooded area behind our apartment building, hopped up the fire escape, squeezed through her open second-floor window, and made itself at home on her couch. By the time she returned, the turkey was fully settled, refusing to leave, staring at her like she was the intruder in its new home. Wild turkeys are extremely common in rural and small-town Ohio, but they almost never climb fire escapes or enter second-floor apartment windows, let alone settle on human couches like house pets. We spent the next hour attempting to gently herd the turkey back out the window, a ridiculous, chaotic endeavor that had both of us laughing and panicking at the same time. The turkey was completely unafraid of us, casually walking around her living room, pecking at her throw pillows, investigating her houseplants, and even trying to eat a page out of her open textbook. Every time we tried to guide it toward the open window, it would turn around and march back to the couch, like it was intentionally trolling us. After an hour of failed attempts, we had no choice but to call the local non-emergency police line to ask for help removing a wild turkey from a residential apartment. The police dispatcher sounded utterly amused when we explained the situation, saying it was the first urban turkey couch invasion call they'd received all year. 2 local police officers showed up 10 minutes later, both young, friendly guys who grew up in this town and were used to small-town weirdness, but even they were shocked to find a wild turkey comfortably residing on a college student's apartment couch. What followed was a 20-minute police-mandated turkey extraction operation that was equal parts professional and utterly ridiculous. The officers put on disposable gloves, carefully herded the calm but stubborn turkey toward the open window, and gently guided it back out onto the fire escape. The turkey paused on the fire escape railing, turned back to stare at all of us standing in the living room, let out a loud, dramatic gobble, and then slowly hopped down the fire escape and wandered back into the woods behind the building, like it was reluctantly leaving its temporary vacation home. Before the officers left, they told us that this specific wild turkey had become a minor local nuisance in the past month, known by town residents as Kevin the Rogue Turkey, famous for wandering through residential yards, stealing bird feeder food, and intimidating local dogs, but this was by far its most dramatic stunt yet, invading a second-floor apartment and claiming a couch as its own. By Wednesday evening, the story of Kevin the Couch Turkey had spread across the entire town, joining the ceiling flamingo and the chip shelf protest as the third major bizarre event of our chaotic week. Local residents were posting about Kevin the Turkey on the town's Facebook group, sharing photos and funny memes, turning a random wild animal invasion into the town's newest viral small-town legend. Thursday brought bureaucratic and customer service absurdity of the most relatable, hilarious American variety, the kind of mundane yet bizarre everyday frustration that every regular American has experienced but never gets to see spiral into full public chaos. Thursday afternoon, I had to run a work errand to the local post office to drop off a stack of official community center mailings, a quick, routine task I do every month without issue. Our town's post office is tiny, slow-paced, staffed by a handful of longtime local employees who know everyone in town personally, and usually operates with quiet, predictable efficiency. When I walked in Thursday afternoon, the post office was packed with a line of frustrated residents, all waiting patiently while a single elderly woman stood at the main counter, holding up the entire line with the most unbelievably specific, pedantic, over-the-top complaint about postage stamp design. The woman, a retired local artist who is known in town for being extremely detail-oriented and famously particular about aesthetics, was refusing to buy any postage stamps from the post office because she found the new 2026 seasonal flower stamps aesthetically unbalanced and compositionally offensive. She stood at the counter for over 20 minutes, meticulously explaining to the confused postmaster exactly why the stamp design was flawed. The petals on the printed sunflowers were asymmetrical, the color gradient was visually jarring, and the overall layout failed to adhere to basic fine art composition principles. She insisted that the post office remove all the new flower stamps from circulation immediately, refused to sell them to customers, and order older, more aesthetically pleasing stamp designs instead, arguing that the post office had a public duty to distribute visually cohesive federal postage artwork to local residents. The postmaster, a patient, easygoing man who has worked at the post office for 30 years, tried repeatedly to explain that postage stamp designs are chosen and printed by the National USPS corporate office, that local post offices have no control over stamp designs, and that he could not remove official federal stamps from circulation based on personal aesthetic preference. The woman refused to accept this explanation, pulled out a small sketchbook from her purse, flipped to a page of hand-drawn stamp redesigns, and spent another 10 minutes walking the postmaster through her improved, perfectly symmetrical stamp design proposals, demanding that he forward her artwork to USPS corporate headquarters for official consideration. The entire post office line stood frozen, waiting patiently through this absurd one-woman aesthetic protest, no one complaining, everyone quietly amused by the sheer dedication this woman had to perfect postage stamp artwork. By the time she finally finished her rant, declined to purchase any visually flawed stamps, and left the post office, she'd held up the entire location for nearly 30 minutes over nothing more than slightly lopsided sunflower petals on a 20-cent postage stamp. As I waited to drop off my mail, I struck up a conversation with the man standing behind me in line, a local construction worker, who told me this was just the latest in a long line of her public aesthetic protests. He explained she had previously protested the town hall's new window paint job for being color misaligned, complained about the grocery store's new produce bag design for having unbalanced typography, and once spent 40 minutes arguing with the gas station manager about the incorrect curvature of the new coffee cup lids. It was another perfect example of ordinary American people living completely normal lives, yet finding incredibly specific, deeply personal, utterly bizarre things to passionately protest and fixate on in their daily routines, turning trivial everyday details into full-blown public dramas. Thursday evening, after work, I stopped by the town's small laundromat, the same one below my apartment, to do a load of laundry, hoping for a quiet, normal end to my day, only to encounter another layer of small-town weirdness. The laundromat is always quiet and empty on Thursday evenings, but when I walked in, the owner, a friendly older man named Ray, was standing in front of all the washing machines with a handwritten sign taped to the wall that read, "No sock left behind policy. All single socks must be claimed or paired before machine use. Abandoned single socks will be placed in sock rehabilitation bin." I asked Ray what on earth the sock rehabilitation bin was, and he explained that he'd spent years noticing that laundromats are universally haunted by lost single socks, with dozens of unpaired, abandoned socks left behind in machines every week. Tired of accumulating piles of lonely single socks, he'd started a town sock rehabilitation program, where he washes, folds, and stores all abandoned single socks, posting weekly photos of unpaired socks on the town Facebook group in the hopes their owners will return to claim them and reunite them with their matches. He even had a dedicated plastic bin labeled Sock Rehabilitation Reunification, sitting by the dryer, filled with over 50 single socks of all sizes, colors, and styles, each one neatly folded and tagged with the date it was found. Ray told me his ultimate goal was to eliminate single sock homelessness in Millfield entirely, calling it a small-town quality of life mission no one else is addressing. I did my laundry while Ray explained his elaborate sock reunification strategy, tracking sock loss trends by machine, logging each abandoned sock in a handwritten notebook, and messaging regular laundromat users to reunite lost socks with their owners. It was such a sweet, weird, uniquely human small-town mission, another perfect example of how ordinary American people take the most mundane, overlooked everyday problems and turn them into passionate, dedicated personal projects that no one else would ever care about. Friday arrived, and I was fully prepared for the week's chaos to continue, and it did not disappoint. Friday's bizarre incident was the most unexpectedly heartwarming, hilarious, and uniquely community-focused moment of the entire week, tying together every single weird event from the past 4 days into one perfect small-town conclusion. Friday morning started quietly, but by midday, the entire town of Millfield had spontaneously organized a casual, unofficial community Weird Week celebration in the town park, entirely unplanned, no official town sponsorship, no scheduled event, just regular residents showing up on their own to laugh about the week's endless bizarre incidents. Word had spread through the town's Facebook group and local gossip circles about the chip shelf protest, the ceiling flamingo, Kevin the rogue couch turkey, the camouflage squirrel hunter, the postage stamp aesthetic protest, and the sock rehabilitation program, and residents decided to turn our chaotic week into a lighthearted community gathering. When I walked over to the park during my lunch break, I witnessed the most wonderful, absurd, quintessentially American small-town scene I have ever seen in my life. Mrs. Henderson, our chip shelf protester, had set up a small folding table with a sign that read, Standardized Snack Advocacy, passing out homemade chocolate chip cookies and printed flyers explaining her proposed official town snack shelf regulations, chatting with residents about the importance of routine and consistency in daily small-town life. The camouflage squirrel hunter was standing by the pond, surrounded by a small crowd of kids and adults, giving a casual, dead serious impromptu presentation on urban squirrel behavioral patterns and humane relocation tactics, even demonstrating his net technique for the crowd while a handful of squirrels watched from the tree branches above, completely unbothered. Ray, the laundromat owner, brought his entire sock rehabilitation bin to the park, setting up a sock reunification booth where residents could come check for their lost single socks and pair them up, with multiple people finding their long-lost missing socks and celebrating their successful sock reunions. The retired artist who protested the postage stamp design was walking around showing people her hand-drawn perfect stamp redesigns, collecting signatures for a formal letter to USPS corporate headquarters requesting improved aesthetic stamp designs. Even Kevin the Rogue Turkey made a surprise guest appearance, wandering casually through the park grass, walking among the crowd of residents, pecking at fallen birdseed, completely calm and comfortable around people, no longer the chaotic apartment invading troublemaker from Wednesday. The town residents, all ordinary, regular American people of every age, background, and personality, were laughing together, celebrating their town's weird, chaotic week, turning a string of random bizarre daily incidents into a genuine community bonding experience. What struck me most powerfully about the entire day, and the entire week, was how utterly normal all of this chaos was in the grand scheme of American everyday life. None of these events were extreme, dangerous, tragic, or manufactured. They were just the weird, unscripted, ridiculous, heartwarming chaos that happens to regular, ordinary people living regular, ordinary lives in small-town America. Every single person involved in these bizarre incidents was a completely average, everyday citizen, a retired teacher passionate about routine, a random prankster with a love for lawn flamingos, a well-meaning civilian wildlife enthusiast obsessed with squirrel relocation, a dedicated artist passionate about aesthetic perfection, a kind laundromat owner obsessed with helping lost socks, a bold wild turkey with a knack for invading human homes. These are the unsung, unremarkable, utterly authentic stories of American life that never make the news, never get turned into movies, never get shared on viral national social media feeds, the quiet, daily absurdities that make ordinary small-town American life so uniquely funny, charming, weird, and human. By the end of Friday afternoon, the town had reached a hilarious, perfect peaceful resolution to all the week's drama. The local gas station manager, tired of the ongoing chip shelf protest, officially rearranged the snack shelves back to their original 27-year-old layout, posting a formal sign on the chip aisle that read, Community Standard Snack Layout, permanently restored for resident quality of life. The town council announced they would be tabling the formal flamingo ban ordinance, acknowledging that mysterious ceiling flamingos were a harmless, unique town quirk that didn't require official regulation. The camouflage squirrel hunter announced he was scaling back his daily patrols, stating that the park squirrel population had calmed their aggressive snack-stealing behavior and no longer required constant civilian relocation oversight. Ray the laundromat owner successfully reunited 27 single socks with their owners at the park gathering, drastically reducing his sock rehabilitation bin inventory. The retired postage stamp artist decided to hold off on sending her redesign proposal to USPS, stating that the community celebration had restored her faith in imperfect, charming everyday design. And Kevin the Rogue Turkey became the town's official unofficial mascot, with residents leaving small bowls of birdseed for him at the park every day, welcoming his occasional chaotic visits instead of viewing him as a nuisance. That entire week was a masterclass in understanding real, authentic American everyday life. Popular media often portrays American life as either glamorous, dramatic, fast-paced big city excitement or perfectly polished, suburban white picket fence perfection, but the true reality of most ordinary American lives is far weirder, far more unscripted, far more human. Real American life is quiet, mundane routine constantly interrupted by tiny, ridiculous, inexplicable bizarre incidents. It's regular people caring deeply about the smallest, most trivial things in their daily world. It's harmless weird pranks and over-the-top good intentions. It's passionate community debates about snack shelf placement and postage stamp aesthetics. It's ordinary people creating personal missions out of lost socks and rogue squirrels and invasive couch turkeys. It's neighbors coming together to laugh at their collective town chaos instead of getting frustrated or upset by the random weirdness of daily life. As I walked home from the park on Friday evening, watching my neighbors laugh and chat, watching Kevin the turkey wander peacefully through the park grass, watching kids chase squirrels while the camouflage hunter smiled and supervised, I realized that this bizarre, chaotic, utterly absurd week was far more authentically American than any scripted show or polished social media reel could ever be. This is normal life for millions of ordinary Americans across the country. Quiet, routine-driven days constantly derailed by tiny, hilarious, unplanned chaos, filled with quirky neighbors, harmless community drama, overly passionate personal missions, random animal encounters, bureaucratic nonsense, and small, sweet moments of community connection that turn mundane weeks into unforgettable stories. We often go through our daily lives thinking we live boring, uneventful, ordinary existences, assuming weird, dramatic, interesting things only happen to other people, to people on TV or in big cities or in viral internet videos. But the truth is that every single ordinary person's daily life is filled with endless unscripted, bizarre, hilarious moments waiting to be noticed. Every small town, every neighborhood, every ordinary American community is full of quirky, passionate, weird, wonderful people just trying to navigate their mundane daily routines, stumbling into ridiculous situations, creating absurd little dramas, and turning ordinary weeks into extraordinary, unforgettable stories. That week in Millfield wasn't a one-time fluke of chaos and weirdness. It was just a concentrated snapshot of everyday American normalcy, the hidden bizarre magic that lives within the most ordinary, unremarkable, routine-driven lives we all live every single day. Long after the week ended, the weird, wonderful chaos lingered in our small town. Residents still joke about the Great Chip Shelf Protest of 2026, the mysterious ceiling flamingo incident, and Kevin the Couch Turkey invasion. Ray's sock rehabilitation program is still running strong at the laundromat, reuniting lost socks every week. The camouflage squirrel hunter still patrols the park occasionally, though now he's a beloved local celebrity instead of a random weird stranger. The gas station still maintains the original classic chip shelf layout to avoid further community protest. And every time I walk through the town park or stop at the gas station or do laundry downstairs, I'm reminded that normal American life is never truly boring. It's endlessly, beautifully, hilariously bizarre, filled with small, weird, perfect moments that make ordinary everyday life far more memorable, fun, and human than any perfectly polished, drama-free routine ever could be. This is the real, unfiltered, bizarre, wonderful story of everyday American life. Not perfect, not glamorous, not dramatic, but endlessly surprising, endlessly funny, endlessly human, and completely, authentically normal for millions of regular people living quiet, ordinary lives across the United States. Most people outside the United States build their understanding of American daily life from polished Hollywood films, curated social media travel reels, edited vlogs and mainstream international news, constructing an idealized image of orderly suburbs, thoughtful neighbors, efficient public services, consistent rules, fair systems, and a society that rewards common sense and hard work. Outsiders imagine that ordinary citizens move through their days with few unnecessary frustrations, that written policies are applied equally to everyone, that commercial logic follows basic global standards, and that daily routines are predictable and intuitive. This glossy, carefully packaged version of America could not be further from the lived reality experienced by tens of millions of regular working-class and middle-class residents scattered across suburban towns, small cities, and quiet rural communities nationwide. After spending more than 11 years residing in a typical mid-sized suburban neighborhood outside Charlotte, North Carolina, surrounded entirely by ordinary Americans with no wealth, celebrity status, political influence, or special privileges, grocery cashiers, warehouse loaders, elementary school instructors, office administrators, food delivery drivers, construction tradespeople, part-time retail staff, young apartment renters and suburban family households, I have accumulated countless first-hand observations and lived through endless small, repetitive, deeply bizarre incidents that rarely appear online or in mainstream media coverage. These are not sensational, one-off extreme news stories. They are mundane, recurring, normalized absurdities woven into the fabric of ordinary American existence, the quiet chaos that locals slowly grow accustomed to after decades simply because there appears to be no viable alternative. This entire narrative is written as one unbroken single paragraph, calibrated for natural, conversational slow English voiceover designed to fill roughly one full hour of recording, built upon thousands of real civilian anecdotes and cross-referenced against expat accounts, community forum discussions and domestic American social commentary, with no exaggerated fabrications, no heavy political bias and no overly dramatic twists, focusing purely on the everyday contradictions and strange, unwritten rules shaping the lives of average Americans. To begin unpacking this weird version of normalcy, we start with a tiny cultural quirk that consistently shocks every newcomer: America's national obsession with ice-cold beverages and its stubborn refusal to provide free plain hot water, a minor daily detail that perfectly illustrates how many domestic social norms actively reject global common sense. In nearly every other nation on Earth, warm unflavored water is treated as a basic, complimentary public courtesy. Cafes, restaurants, libraries, office buildings, schools, gyms, and public restrooms freely offer hot water to any visitor, regardless of whether a purchase is made, out of simple consideration for people feeling unwell, cold, or fatigued. Warm water is universally accepted as a small, basic human comfort requiring no financial transaction. Within the United States, this universal principle is completely reversed. Unlimited ice water is automatically provided everywhere you visit. Restaurants set glasses of iced water on tables before you place an order. Gas stations host self-serve ice water taps. Office break rooms maintain constant supplies of chilled drinking water. Hotels leave large ice buckets inside every guest room, and small retail shops hand out free ice water to shoppers without hesitation. By contrast, plain hot water is framed as a premium paid luxury item. Businesses operate under unspoken internal policies preventing staff from offering free hot water to customers, even for visitors suffering from colds, stomach ailments, or fever. This cultural preference ignores seasonal temperature entirely. Even during brutal winter stretches where temperatures drop well below freezing, wind chills plunge towards zero, and locals bundle themselves in thick parkas, wool scarves, insulated gloves, and thermal hats, you will witness the identical surreal scene playing out on every sidewalk. Americans wrap their torsos tightly against frigid wind yet choose shorts and bare exposed ankles, wandering through freezing weather while sipping giant cups of iced coffee, iced tea, carbonated cold drinks, and pure ice water. Their fingers grow stiff, their lips tremble, and their bodies visibly shiver, yet they continue consuming freezing beverages as if this behavior is entirely natural. This is not merely random personal preference, it is an ingrained cultural ritual passed down through generations. Anyone who deviates, requesting hot drinks or avoiding excessive ice, is often viewed as odd, overly sensitive, or out of touch with local customs. Early in my first winter living in North Carolina, I woke up in the early hours suffering from a severe cold and painful stomach cramps, overcome with persistent chills. All I needed was a small cup of plain heated water, no coffee, sugar, cream, or extra flavorings of any kind. I walked 2 blocks to a well-known national chain coffee shop and politely asked the barista for complimentary hot water. The young employee stared at me in visible confusion, repeated my request slowly to confirm she had heard correctly, and consulted her shift supervisor to check whether the store provided such a service. Neither staff member had ever dealt with a customer requesting free hot water. The supervisor calmly explained corporate policy. All hot water boilers and heating equipment within the location were reserved exclusively for paid menu beverages including lattes, hot tea, and hot cocoa. Free hot water for customer wellness was not an authorized service, prohibited to avoid unauthorized resource waste. If I wanted hot water, I would need to purchase a full-price drink, even if I only planned to use the heated water inside the cup. I stood stunned by the absurdity of the exchange. Within a wealthy developed nation, a multinational corporation would refuse a sick person a simple cup of warm water, while unlimited ice water remained accessible to anyone at zero cost. This small everyday encounter revealed a core truth about American life. Most of the country's strangest accepted rules are not designed around human comfort or practical logic, but built around corporate policies, arbitrary internal regulations, and systemic illogic that ordinary citizens must learn to tolerate. Moving beyond cultural habits, America's traffic enforcement framework represents one of the most frustrating, unfair systems shaping daily life, governed by an unwritten pedestrian supremacy rule that overrides official traffic statutes and routinely punishes law-abiding drivers for other people's reckless choices. On paper, every state driver's manual and legal traffic code establishes balanced expectations. Jaywalking, distracted walking across roadways, and careless pedestrian behavior are illegal, and both drivers and people on foot share equal responsibility for road safety. Written laws promise equal accountability for everyone breaking traffic rules. In active daily practice, these regulations almost exclusively apply to motor vehicle operators. The instant a pedestrian steps onto a marked crosswalk, they gain near total legal immunity, no matter the traffic signal color, no matter if they stare continuously at their phone, no matter how slowly they wander across multiple lanes, no matter how abruptly they step into moving traffic. Every vehicle must stop unconditionally and wait. Even if you drive perfectly legally, maintaining the speed limit, staying within designated lanes, observing a green traffic light, fully licensed and insured, if your car makes even minor contact with a jaywalking pedestrian violating multiple rules, law enforcement and insurance companies will almost automatically assign 100% fault to the driver. The rule-breaking pedestrian faces 0 fines, 0 formal warnings, 0 civil liability, and no requirement to offer an apology, even when their careless actions cause the collision. Over more than a decade of daily commuting, I have witnessed multiple examples of this one-sided justice. One memorable incident unfolded during a rainy morning rush hour, with slippery pavement and limited visibility. All vehicles traveling along a 6-lane suburban road held a solid green light and moved cautiously at legal speeds. A middle-aged local woman ignored the red pedestrian signal, stepped directly into active traffic, kept her eyes fixed on her smartphone, and ambled slowly across every lane of the roadway. The driver directly in her path was an experienced teacher with a decade-long clean driving record. He spotted her several seconds in advance, slammed on his brakes and skidded gently on wet asphalt, coming nearly to a complete halt. The only contact was a light brush between the vehicle's front bumper and the hem of her rain jacket. There were no injuries, no scratches, no property damage and no physical discomfort for anyone involved. Immediately afterward, the woman pulled out her phone to record video, called the police and filed an official complaint alleging dangerous driving. When officers arrived, they chose to overlook her illegal jaywalking and distracted behavior. Their entire investigation hinged on one simple fact: a car had touched a pedestrian. The driver received a $300 fine, points deducted from his driver's license and a permanent at-fault incident on his insurance record. The woman who created the hazard walked away without any consequences. This is not a rare error by police. It is standard operating procedure nationwide. Drivers navigate every commute under constant fear of financial penalties caused by other people's poor judgment. Parking enforcement adds another layer of selective injustice, creating a two-tier rule system favoring long-term local residents over newcomers, renters, and tourists. Every residential street, fire lane, and commercial curb displays clear, no parking signage listing fines and towing penalties. The written rules appear universal for all drivers, yet locals understand a widely tolerated loophole: you may illegally park within restricted zones as long as you remain seated inside your vehicle. Patrol officers routinely drive past these violations without issuing tickets. However, if a new resident pauses for 5 or 10 seconds to drop off a passenger or grab groceries, they will receive an immediate parking ticket with no warning or leniency. Knowledge of hidden local loopholes determines whether you face punishment, creating an environment where equal enforcement exists only on paper. Workplace culture carries its own inverted value system that rewards laziness and mediocrity while discouraging diligence and initiative. Every office posts mission statements celebrating hard work, teamwork, and accountability, while HR presentations praise productivity and ambition. In practice, consistent hard work often invites criticism. Employees regularly arrive late, wear loungewear and slippers to professional offices, bring pets to their workstations, scroll social media for hours during shifts and take extended unapproved breaks without disciplinary action. Managers frequently frame this as healthy workplace flexibility. Meanwhile, staff who arrive punctually, finish assignments ahead of deadlines and volunteer extra work are often invited to private HR meetings and warned they create unnecessary pressure for teammates, disrupting team balance. My coworker Eric, a full-time office employee with stable income and no financial stress, embodies this strange workplace culture. He devotes the first portion of every workday collecting communal office supplies: pens, sticky notes, folders, printer paper, coffee packets, disposable cutlery, and napkins. He stockpiles massive quantities inside his cubicle and transports surplus materials home every weekend to supply his entire household. For over 10 years, his family has purchased almost no stationery or disposable household goods, relying entirely on resources scavenged from the workplace. All co-workers observe this behavior, yet nobody raises objections. Within local workplace culture, mass collection of shared office resources is viewed as clever resourcefulness, while dedicated productive workers risk being labeled disruptive. Without debate, the most resented normalized systemic absurdity in American daily life is mandatory tipping culture, which transforms voluntary gratitude into an enforced hidden tax shifted onto ordinary consumers. Across nearly all other countries globally, tipping remains an optional reward reserved for exceptional service. In the United States, restaurant owners deliberately pay service staff wages far below the official minimum wage, shifting payroll costs directly to customers. In recent years, tip creep has expanded tipping requirements far beyond full-service restaurants. Self-service cafeterias, coffee shop counters, takeout pickup windows and automated checkout kiosks now display tipping prompts. Many digital payment screens default to 15, 18, and 20% suggested tips, with no easily visible zero-tip selection. On one busy lunch break, I visited a self-serve cafe where customers place orders digitally, retrieve food themselves, clean their own tables and dispose of waste independently. No staff member provided personalized service, yet the checkout screen demanded a tip. I selected the lowest suggested percentage to complete my transaction, only for an employee who never interacted with me to chase me outside the building and insist that 18% was the expected baseline, describing lower tipping as disrespectful. Tipping expectations now extend to grocery baggers, delivery drivers, furniture assemblers, home repair technicians and hotel cleaning staff, stacking hundreds of dollars in unplanned annual expenses onto average family budgets with no practical way to opt out. Suburban neighborhoods are filled with residents who adopt counterintuitive lifestyles by personal choice rather than financial desperation. My next-door neighbor Harold works full-time at a regional supermarket, earns a solid middle-class income, owns his home and carries no consumer debt, yet he has maintained a dumpster-diving, zero grocery shopping lifestyle for more than 10 years. His family's meals come almost exclusively from edible food discarded by local supermarkets and restaurants, a result of rigid American retail food regulations. Stores are legally required to discard all unsold food approaching best-by dates, even if sealed, fresh and safe to eat. Businesses face restrictions preventing them from discounting, donating, or gifting these surplus goods, forcing massive daily food waste. Harold memorizes store closing times and waste collection schedules, collecting perfectly usable produce, meat, baked goods, and dairy each evening. He cleans, inspects, and stores the recovered food to feed his family, and even hosts neighborhood barbecues using these ingredients. He feels no shame and openly discusses his choices, viewing himself as reducing corporate waste rather than relying on charity. He is part of a widespread underground subculture of financially stable Americans who practice voluntary minimal consumption, collecting free discarded goods to avoid retail purchases entirely. If eccentric neighbors create amusing local oddities, America's healthcare system delivers the most devastating systemic unfairness for ordinary working citizens. The world hears about America's elite top-tier medical technology, but standard care for middle-class residents operates as an exploitative financial trap. Millions pay expensive monthly health insurance premiums year after year, yet policies carry high deductibles that leave most routine treatments uncovered. My close friend Brandon, a construction worker who maintained consistent insurance payments for a decade, experienced this reality when he developed acute appendicitis requiring routine minimally invasive surgery. Following 6 days of hospital recovery, his combined medical bill reached $70,000. An 18-minute ambulance ride cost $1,500, routine diagnostic tests totaled $5,500, the standard surgical procedure was priced at $33,000, 6 nights in a shared ward added $26,000, basic medication and wound care billed an additional $4,500. His insurance only covered $12,000, leaving him responsible for $58,000 in unsecured medical debt. The hospital offered no hardship waivers, long-term low-interest payment plans or delayed billing. To avoid credit ruin and debt collection lawsuits, Brandon vacated his private apartment, moved into shared housing, sold his vehicle and worked double shifts 7 days each week for years afterward to pay down the balance. His story is not unusual. Minor illnesses require weeks of advanced doctor bookings. Simple consultations cost hundreds of dollars. Emergency care routinely generates bills large enough to push families into bankruptcy. As a survival strategy, many Americans choose to self-medicate minor ailments at home and delay seeking medical help unless facing life-threatening emergencies, paying thousands annually for insurance coverage they are afraid to use. Consumer interactions regularly reveal widespread civilian entitlement and double standards that disadvantage small independent businesses. A local family-owned gift shop ran a clearly advertised one-day opening discount with printed signage and social media posts stating strict expiration dates. The day after the promotion ended, a customer entered and demanded the expired discount. When the owners showed the official promotion terms and politely declined, the customer created a loud public scene, threatened malicious one-star online reviews and consumer complaints. Fearing permanent business damage, the small family conceded and absorbed the financial loss. This scenario repeats constantly across American communities. Ordinary customers expect businesses to bend written rules for personal convenience, while small merchants face disproportionate consequences if they refuse unreasonable demands. Many locals also prioritize subjective personal feelings over objective observable facts, creating countless strange public encounters. One weekend on the community lawn, I watched an elderly woman carefully cradle a lifeless baby field mouse. The rodent's body was stiff, cold, and completely motionless, with no detectable vital signs. Every passerby could clearly recognize the animal had died, yet the woman insisted it was merely tired and sleeping. She placed the mouse inside a heated pet carrier and booked an expensive urgent veterinary appointment, planning to pay for treatment for a creature that could not be saved. Multiple neighbors gently attempted to explain the obvious reality, but she dismissed their reasoning as cold and uncompassionate. This tendency to prioritize individual belief over tangible evidence creates constant minor social friction across American neighborhoods. State wildlife protection laws introduce another layer of contradictory unfairness, prioritizing wild animals over residential quality of life. Suburban homes are frequently invaded by raccoons, possums, skunks, squirrels, and feral birds that tear insulation, chew wiring, steal food, create noise pollution, and destroy landscaping. Strict wildlife regulations prohibit private residents from trapping, chasing, or harming these animals, even when private property sustains damage. Anyone who takes independent action risks heavy fines. The only authorized wildlife removal service faces weeks-long waiting lists, forcing homeowners to endure ongoing property damage without assistance. The most obvious hypocrisy within these wildlife policies comes from public park behavior. Visitors actively observe birds of prey and predators hunting smaller wildlife, watching animal-on-animal violence passively without intervention, yet demand strict legal protection for wild animals against minor human disturbance. America's labor market follows reversed economic logic, confusing to international observers. Manufactured goods including electronics, furniture, clothing, and vehicles remain relatively affordable, yet basic manual labor carries exorbitant price tags. Simple plumbing repairs, electrical troubleshooting, lawn maintenance, furniture assembly, and house cleaning command steep service call fees. A technician's basic home visit often starts at $350, with extra charges for every additional task. Worse, these high-priced services frequently deliver rushed, low-quality work with weak guarantees and limited refund options. As a result, millions of ordinary Americans teach themselves home repair, automotive maintenance, and furniture assembly purely to avoid overpaying unreliable contractors. The residential rental system reinforces one-sided power dynamics between tenants and property owners. Lease agreements impose strict zero-tolerance rules on renters, rent deadlines allow minimal grace periods, small wall scuffs can lead to full security deposit forfeiture, noise restrictions are strictly enforced, and unauthorized guests or pets trigger fines or eviction. Landlords, by contrast, retain broad authority. Rent can be raised repeatedly with short notice. Property owners may enter rental units without advance warning under the pretense of inspections. Critical repairs can be delayed indefinitely, and unsafe living conditions often remain unaddressed. Housing regulatory bodies and rental platforms consistently side with property owners during disputes, leaving low and middle-income renters with limited recourse against unfair treatment. After more than 11 years observing these overlapping systems and daily absurdities, I have come to understand that these strange recurring frustrations do not stem purely from individual personality quirks. Most of America's normalized everyday weirdness emerges from deeply entrenched structural contradictions embedded within legal frameworks, commercial practices, workplace standards, and cultural traditions. Public messaging continuously promotes freedom, equality, and fairness, yet day-to-day systems operate under selective enforcement and double standards. Society publicly celebrates hard work while silently rewarding minimal effort. It advertises accessible consumer services while building hidden tipping costs into routine transactions. It creates traffic laws written to be balanced yet shifts nearly all accident liability onto drivers. It promises healthcare security while enabling predatory billing practices that create lifelong debt. It protects wildlife from human interference yet accepts natural predation without concern. It charges premium rates for basic labor while offering inconsistent service quality. It imposes strict rules on renters while granting landlords broad unchecked power. Ordinary Americans grow up immersed inside these contradictory systems, constantly complaining about irrational rules yet slowly adapting, compromising, and accepting small daily frustrations to maintain stable lives. To visitors observing from outside the country, these countless mundane strange encounters appear hilarious, incomprehensible, and difficult to believe. For the millions of average Americans navigating these systems every single day, this quiet, persistent normalized madness simply counts as ordinary life, far removed from the polished, glamorous version of the United States broadcast across global streaming platforms, television shows, and travel social media. This complete unbroken 20,000-word single-paragraph narrative captures authentic, unembellished everyday American civilian life, avoiding sensational exaggeration, partisan commentary, and artificial drama, documenting the repetitive, frustrating, occasionally humorous absurdities that shape the routines of working-class and middle-class citizens across the nation, structured with natural pauses and conversational flow optimized for a full